I'm Annie. I'm currently at the University of Montreal as a postdoc, but I did most of this work at Texas A&M. And I'm going to take you to the Bahamas. We're out of Yucatan now and into the Bahamas, and I have a little bit of a biogeochemical spin on some things. So, sticking with what we've done this morning, which I'm really grateful for, I just wanted to do a quick land acknowledgement. I mean, being here in Hawaii, I've learned that it's such an indigenous space, and the people today are identified as Native Hawaiians. I recognize this land was yielded under duress protest to avoid further violence. And the indigenous knowledge systems that are in place here and the amazing sustainability of the Native Hawaiian peoples have really allowed us to enjoy the beauty of Hawaii today. So truly, thank you so much to the organizing team for bringing us here. Mahalo. Also, I'd like to acknowledge at the beginning of the talk, and you might notice in the program, I'm the only name written on my abstract. I think that was just because I messed up the submission. My science is not done in a vacuum. I have lots of people that contribute to this work, mainly David Bronkovitz and John Pullman. I did my PhD with Pete Van Hangstem at Texas A&M, so they're actually absolutely critical for making this happen. And also we got some great funding from NSF, National Geographic, and some smaller grants from Texas A&M that allowed me to really do this. So coastal sinkholes are my name and game. I really love them. They're an important part of the Anchialine ecosystem. They're in high densities. They're basically lake-like features that are connected to the ocean, but they're in high densities on carbonate platforms. And so here I have a picture of the two most northern Bahamian islands, Grand Bahama and Great Abaco. And each point on this map, every blue point is a sinkhole and blue hole. There's tons of them. This is the native land of the Lucayan people that I'd like to point out. And this isn't the only place that these sinkholes occur in high densities. There are also in other places in the South Pacific that are carbonate islands. So essentially they form from collapse of the carbonate karst system. Sea level rise and rainfall allows for water to fill them up, and eventually there's enough accommodation space to have sediment accumulate at the base. And we get that window into the aquifer and we see the three stratified water masses that we've talked about a lot here today: a freshwater lens, saline groundwater below, and a mixing zone. And a lot of cool biogeochemistry can happen within that mixing space. So I'm most interested in organic matter that accumulates at the bottom of the sinkhole. But this is a really, really good picture that actually depicts the process geomorphologically of what happens when a sinkhole caves in and starts to fill. I should take my mask off. How about that? So my glasses stop fogging. But anyway, this is a really, really nice picture because it shows carbonate rubble at the beginning. So when the sinkhole starts to cave, and then there's enough water that marsh vegetation starts to grow. Eventually the aquifer keeps rising up and it floods out the vegetation and that deposits as peat. And then sediment can start to accumulate. And I always think this picture looks like a delicious French dessert. There's lots of layers, but every single different color, every layer actually represents a seasonal change or change in the climate that we can resolve from analyzing the sediments. So I'm really, really interested in the organic matter that gets preserved at the base of the sinkholes and actually what's accumulating in the water column. So from this work on all the sediments that we've taken from a lot of the sinkholes in the Bahamas, we've been able to understand that the Abaco landscape has changed over the last 10,000 years. And that has probably been due to variability in precipitation. And as a paleoclimatologist or a paleobiogeochemist, we can connect these to broader scale changes in climate, like the North Atlantic subtropical high, which is a really big pressure system in the North Atlantic that suppresses rainfall at different times in Earth's history. So the two sites that I'm going to talk about today are two sinkholes on Abaco. One is drinkwater sinkhole and one is Blackwood sinkhole. So Blackwood is 40 meters in diameter. It's about 30 meters deep, and it's 200 meters from the coastline, and it's surrounded by a coastal wetland. And so much of my master's work and PhD work was on this sinkhole, and it basically records 3,000 years of environmental change occurring, including hurricane strikes and rainfall variability and landscape variability. And the second one is drinkwater sinkhole, which is much, much bigger. It's like 200 meters in diameter. We just cored this a couple years ago before the pandemic, and this was a big, big victory for us because this is the first time that we cored past the Holocene. We actually got about 40,000 years of mud recorded at the base of the sinkhole. And this is cool because this can actually tell us what climate might have been doing in the glacial cycles during in the Bahamas. So we're very, very excited about it. And so I told you I'm excited about organic matter that's in sediments that can document past change. But how does the modern water column actually impact the organic matter that's preserved through time? And this was the last chapter of my dissertation that I really wanted to explore. And so I asked the research question, what are the geochemical signatures of suspended particulate organic matter within these two sinkholes? So first we do our hydrographic cast just to ensure that we have good hydrology for good preservation, and all those cool biogeochemical changes might be able to be captured across the water masses. And so Blackwood, the smaller hole, is up top, and Drinkwater, the larger one, is on the base. On the y-axis there's depth, and on the x-axis is all the parameters that we measure with an exosonde, which includes temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, pH. And we see that they're density stratified all throughout the year, and each color here represents a seasonal cast, because we've gone to these islands quite a few times and we've got to see seasonal variability, but they change. And one thing that I added kind of later in my PhD is that I wanted to look at the isotopic composition of these water masses. And so Blackwood, specifically in the freshwater meteoric lens, looks really like the atmospheric rainfall that falls down. But Drinkwater is really, really different. There's probably evidence for evaporation within Drinkwater. It's a larger basin. It's probably hydrologically a bit different than the smaller hole Blackwood. So we start to observe these changes. They're still salinity stratified, but there's definitely variability in the hydrology. So after we did those hydrocasts, we just dropped down and took some water samples using our coring raft, which is this portable A-frame that we schlepped through the Caribbean forest and built. And then I just collected water samples, which probably looks very similar to a lot of you. And I took them back to the lab, and I just filtered them on a GFF filter and got the suspended particulates on that filter. And I think what was so cool is that we got to see these colors in person. You know, I originally was inspired by a National Geographic article that talked about microbial variability in these sinkhole systems, but actually going out, taking some samples, and seeing this color variability down the water column, of which this is the top and this is the base, was just mind-blowing. And maybe these colors that we observed are similar to what Brett published in 2011. I found in some other sinkholes close by. I don't have the biological data associated with these particulates, but maybe that's something for future work. So all of that happened. I got some really cool organic matter, but my specialty and what I really like to do is biomarker geochemistry. And so biomarkers are essentially molecular fossils. There's like a whole suite of biomarkers that you can use, and including using terrestrial leaf waxes to reconstruct like hydroclimate changes through time. But one that's really cool are GGGTs, and they're glycerol dialkyl glycerol tetraethers. They're basically formed in the microbial, like membrane lipids in the microbial community. And there's two main classes of GGGTs, isoprenoidal GGGTs and branched GGGTs. And so the branched guys come from bacteria, and the iso guys come from archaea. And so in general, this is a really nice graphic by one really good biomarker geochemist. Basically on the land system, we have way more branched GGGTs than in the ocean, where we have much more isolated GGGTs that are produced by archaea. But these have been used by paleo people a lot in sediments in the ocean to reconstruct variability in temperature, in salinity, in methanotrophy through time, and also terrigenous inputs through time. So I wanted to explore whether or not we could find these in concentrations in coastal sinkholes and if they were useful. So another part of this project, in collaboration with John Pullman, is that I took some water samples for just methane concentrations from headspace gas, and found that from the top of the sinkhole, which is on the y-axis, we have the top of the sinkhole and the base of the sinkhole and water depth, and just concentration of methane on the x, so we have an increase of methane as we go down in the water mass, which tracks with what we know about the general hydrology. And so from a GGGT perspective, a lot of people do a lot of work to calibrate what these molecules mean for all those environmental parameters, and two fun ratios can indicate either methanogenesis or methanotrophy. And so when I looked at those ratios from the samples that we collected from the particulates, we see evidence for both of those processes happening in the water column. And so the freshwater meteoric lens in this hole goes to about 7. And so in the mixing zone and also the saline groundwater, we have this increased evidence for methanotrophy and methanogenesis. So this is for the smaller hole. And you'll notice that those methane concentrations are actually quite high. They go to about like 12,000 nanomole per liter, so quite good. In drink water, we see the same pattern. So this is the larger sinkhole, except the concentrations of methane are a bit lower, orders of magnitude lower, but we see the same pattern. In the mixing zone, we have higher concentrations of methane, and we also have this increased evidence for methanotrophy and methanogenesis. So this is really exciting, meaning that I think we can use these molecules, and there's probably some fun archaea and microbial life living in these sinkholes that can tell us a lot. So we're still kind of working up exactly what this means, and I'm in prep with my co-authors now, but this is kind of some of the preliminary results. You might be asking, why does this matter? How is this cool? But it connects to what we know about global biogeochemistry. So I'd be remiss not to talk about how Abaco is also spanked by hurricanes a lot. So most recently, it was hit by Hurricane Dorian. It was the strongest hurricane to hit that region in a very long time. It basically stalled over Grand Bahama and Great Abaco and just dumped massive amounts of rain and totally devastated communities. So it's really hard for our team to kind of reconcile with that and also know that we study in a vulnerable area and want to keep learning about it. But in that regard, I had one of my colleagues, Jeff Donnelly at Woods Hole, was zooming around Google Earth just to see how the landscape had changed post-hurricane. And so this is drinkwater sinkhole again, the larger sinkhole. And this is pre-Hurricane Dorian. This is about 5 days after Hurricane Dorian. And you can see that there's this large brown kind of mass coming out of the coastline. And it's not all across the coastline, right? It's kind of strategically here. So we think that this is evidence for organic matter-rich submarine groundwater discharge actually going into the coastal ocean. So it just kind of validates the idea that if we can characterize the organic matter within these systems, it could give us a good insight into how the coastal ocean might change during these extreme events. So in other ways, the flux of methane to the atmosphere is really unresolved at a global scale, especially in blue carbon systems, and methane is really important because it has a super intense warming potential. Our coastal sinkholes, we see that we have increased methane in those denser layers at the base. Are they actually sources or sinks of CH4? We know the hydrology is really dynamic and it turns over all the time, so are there times where actually that methane-rich water comes out into the coastal ocean and gets exposed to the atmosphere and actually has these regional or localized releases of these greenhouse gases that matter a lot? And so David actually recently just had a paper published that says that hurricanes can actually promote accelerated carbon uptake in ecosystems, and this might have implications for that environmental aspect. And we already know there's high organic matter content in the sediments. Has that been variable through time? If there was this deep overpumping and those particulates are not actually getting to the seds? So there's climate and environmental implications because resolving these sinks or sources is helpful for our model and carbon budget projections. And there's ecological relevance because methane and other sea species fuel Anchialine food webs. So that's really it. And also 16% of global coastlines are karst, so not a small percent. So I think it's worth it to study. That's all I have. Mahalo very much. That's my email and my Twitter, but who knows how long I'll keep my Twitter because things like disaster is happening at Twitter right now. But that's it. Thank you so much.
All right, mahalo, Anne. We have some time for questions.
Sure. That was really interesting. I may have missed this, but do you think the methane production is from rotting vegetation down below, or where do you think this is coming from?
It's all organic matter degradation in the water column, and the organic matter comes from two main sources in these systems: terrestrial, whatever's produced on the terrestrial surface, but also organic matter that's produced in situ by the phytoplankton community or other little microbial critters that are living in the water column. So as they degrade, and some guys are taking advantage of the guys who are degrading, that organic matter is just breaking down and producing methane. And then when it gets into the sediments, it produces it again, because there's other communities that live down there that want to break it down. Go ahead, right here.
I'm curious if you know, do these sinkholes have a cultural significance or cultural use?
They do, and I must admit admit, like, I feel like during my PhD, maybe when I started, or maybe like it's more prevalent right now that maybe I didn't ask the right questions to investigate before I started kind of doing all this work technically. I think it's a complicated place to be when we begin in research. But I do know that the ancient Lucayans used them sometimes as burial grounds and sacrificial kind of spaces. There are researchers in the Bahamas that are constantly trying to improve the archaeological and anthropological kind of history of the islands. So lots of cool discoveries have been found from like a species perspective, but also I think like one of my colleagues, we cored through actually a human femur bone, and that actually improved the dating of when the Lucayans got to the most northern Bahamian islands, which might have been a product of trying to find more water because there was drought in the southern Caribbean. So that's a paper that published. So yeah, definitely more to be done, but they are significant. Anything else? Go ahead.
We have lots of well-documented sinkholes, with lots of sediment in them,
Yeah, I do know about those sinkholes. They're very exciting too, and some of this work has been explored there, not so much from the archaeal perspective, but a lot of the other biomarkers. Some people like Tim Philly and Kate Freeman have
20 years ago, I was approached by some geologist from somewhere who's going to come and do just what you were doing in one of the
Yeah, it's a painstaking process. I've lost, like, got a couple of gray hairs from this, but it's good. Yeah. Well, I'm around if anyone wants to chat more. Thank you so much.